$1,370 a month for 9 years, which is $148,000, and I never told anybody outside my own house what it was for. It was my son's restitution. He was 24, and he took $88,000 out of the place he managed, and the court gave him a choice that is not a choice. Pay it all back on a schedule, or 30 months inside. I paid it. I took every hour of overtime the hall put on the board for 9 years. I remortgaged the house on Bellin Street in the 2nd year, and I lost the house in the 7th, and my wife and I have rented ever since. 9 years after the last payment cleared, a man from the state asked my son where that money had come from, and my son signed a piece of paper saying he had always assumed it was mine to launder. 11 days later, 2 men walked me off a live unit at 11 in the morning, in front of a crew of 40, because a federal credential I have held for 34 years had been suspended pending review. Nobody has ever accused me of anything. They do not have to. If you have ever had your whole living rest on a card in your wallet that somebody else issues, stay with me. Subscribe to this channel before you go any further, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. My name is Stanislaw Wardega, and everybody has called me Stash since about 1981. I am 61 years old. I live in Colbeck, Indiana, and I have been a union pipefitter for 34 years. Most of that has been turnarounds. A refinery shuts a unit down every few years, and about 900 people descend on it for 6 weeks and rebuild the inside of it, and then it starts up again and everybody goes home. The work is hot and it is loud, and the money is in the hours. One thing about my trade turns out to be the center of this whole story, so I will put it here at the front where you can hold on to it. I have never in 34 years been the keeper of my own record. The hall keeps it. Every job I have ever worked came off a dispatch board with my name and my card number on it, and every hour was reported by a foreman who was not me, and every check came through the local. Every weld I ever laid on a pressure line carries my stencil number, which is mine and nobody else's, and it goes on a weld map, and an X-ray of it sits in a file cabinet for as long as that vessel is in service. I did not choose any of that. A union trade just works that way. And it is the only reason I am not finished. Now my son. Marek was 24 and he was managing a building supply outfit out on the state road, and over 19 months he took $88,000 out of it, not in one go. In small amounts, the way it always is, and he was very good at it right up until he was not. I am not going to defend him, and I am not going to pretend I did not know he was capable of it. There had been things. The prosecutor's office offered restitution in full on a schedule, with 30 months hanging over it if he missed. He was 24. He had a girl and a lease and no money at all. My brother Zygmunt told me not to pay it. He is a plumber, 66 now, 2 vans, and his own name on them. He came to the kitchen and said the boy needs the 30 months more than he needs the money. And I said, get out. And he came back a week later and said it again in the car park at St. Casimir's after Mass. And that time he said something else. He said, Stash, you are not saving your son. You are buying yourself out of having raised a thief. I told him to get out of the car. 9 years ago, and we have not spoken since. Christmases go through my wife. Here's what I want you to understand about that sentence, and it is nothing like what you would picture. He was right. I knew it in the car park. I have known it every day since. Taking it back would mean saying it out loud to his face, and in 9 years I have got as far as the phone twice. So, $1,370 a month. The figure was the court's and not mine, and it included the interest they add on. Payment came due on the 15th, and the clerk's window on Wabash shut at 4 o'clock. And for the first 3 months, I drove it there myself, and then in September of that year, I got put on a turnaround at Whiting, where you cannot leave the unit between 6 and 6. My daughter comes into it here. Helena was 25. She had took a car in an afternoon, and she started driving to the hall on payday, picking up my check, and running it to the clerk's window before 4. 108 times over 9 years, every 15th. We never talked about it. Not once, not in 9 years. She never asked me why I was doing it, and I never thanked her for driving it, because in that house we did not talk about the restitution at all. Bernadette had decided early on that the way to live with it was not to mention it, and she was probably right. Helena kept every stub. 9 years of them, in a shoebox, and nobody asked her to do that either. I want to be plain about what the 9 years actually cost, because a number does not carry it. The house on Bellin Street went in the 7th year. We had 31 years in that house. I remortgaged it in the 2nd year to stay ahead of the schedule, and then the overtime got thinner for about 18 months, and that was that. 4,100 hours of overtime in 9 years. I did not know that figure at the time. Somebody worked it out for me later, and I will get to that. I missed 9 Christmases at Whiting and Robinson. Helena was in her 20s for all of them. Bernadette never once said the thing she was entitled to say, which was that this was her house too, and nobody had asked her. She has never said it to this day. The last payment cleared in the April, 9 years ago. Marek sent me a message that said, "Thank you for everything, Dad," and a thumbs up. And then nobody in my family said one word about any of it for 9 years, which is what made everything that came after possible. Marek did well. Everybody gets that part wrong. He got clean, he got sober about money, in a way I've never entirely understood. He moved to Terre Haute and got into distribution. And by this year he was up for a regional post with a compliance-sensitive employer. Compliance-sensitive means they run you. And running him meant running the conviction. And running the conviction meant somebody from the state sitting down with him in October and asking him about the restitution. I know roughly what was asked because I have read the file. They wanted to know how a 24-year-old with a lease and no money paid $148,000. And Marek told them he had always assumed it was his father's. Which is true, and would have been the end of it, except he did not stop there. He said he had been told not to ask questions about it. He said he had wondered for years whether he was paying back one theft with another. Nobody told me any of this. Not my son, not the state, not anybody. I found out on the 11th of November at 11 in the morning, when the contractor's safety man and a fellow I did not know came into the unit and asked me to come down off the scaffold and walk out with them. And I walked out through 40 men I have worked with for 20 years. They were decent about it, which is the worst part. Nobody shouted at me. The safety man carried my bag out to the gate and said, "Stash, I don't know what this is, and I don't think anybody does." My TWIC had been suspended pending review. If you have never had a card like that, let me tell you what it is. A TWIC is a federal credential. Without one, you do not get through the gate of a refinery or a port, not as a fitter, not as a laborer, not to sweep. 34 years of trade and one plastic card, and when the card is off, the trade is off. There was no hearing, and there was never going to be one. Somebody I will never meet reads a file I have never seen and decides, and no rule says when. 11 weeks. 11 weeks of that is not what anybody imagines, and I had never once in my life been out of work. You get up at 4 anyway, that does not stop, and there is nowhere to be. I drove to the hall the first 3 mornings habitats and sat in the truck in the car park and did not go in, because everybody in there would have been kind to me, and I could not have that. Bernadette's insurance is through the hall, and the hall's insurance requires dispatch, and I found that out on the 2nd week and did not tell her for another 2. And I could not phone my son. I want to be careful here because I have had a year to think about it, and I do not want to make myself better than I was. I could have phoned him. Nothing stopped me. I did not because I did not know what I would find out, and as long as I did not phone him, I could still believe there had been a misunderstanding. The waiver process is worth describing because it is the part nobody outside a licensed trade understands. There is no hearing. There is no hearing officer, and there is no date. You submit a written request for a waiver to an address, and a person you will never meet reads a file you have never seen, and at some point a letter comes or it does not. I asked Fabian what the average was. He said he had seen it go 3 weeks, and he had seen it go 7 months. 7 months, and there is no way to ask. You get a phone number, and the phone number is a recording, and the recording says that individual case status cannot be provided, and I called it anyway on the 16th day, and listened to the whole thing to the end, like a man checking a lock he already knows is shut. If you have ever waited on a decision from somebody who does not know your name and is not required to tell you anything, you know that the waiting is not the hard part. The hard part is that there is nothing to do. I am 61 and I have never once in my life had a problem I could not do something about, and I sat in a rented duplex in Kolbeck for 11 weeks with nothing to do about it. On the 9th day my brother Zygmunt left a voicemail. 9 years, and he left a voicemail and it said, "I heard. Call me if you want." That is all it said. I did not call him. Now what I did instead, and this is where the trade comes back, there was nothing to argue with. Nobody had alleged anything, so there was no accusation for me to answer. A man wondered about you to somebody with a file, and the file is now a thing that exists, and shouting at your own son gets you a recording of a 61-year-old man shouting. But here is what 34 years in a union trade actually gives you, and I did not understand it until I needed it. Everything about me is written down by somebody else. So on the 12th day, I went to the hall, and I asked Dorota Pilch, who has run that dispatch office since 2004, to pull my whole history, not a summary, all of it. Every dispatch, every contractor, every hour, every check, 1991 to now. She said, "All of it, Stash." I said, "All of it," and I said, "Dorota, I want it to come from you and not from me, and I do not want to touch it." She understood exactly what I was asking. She printed it, and she signed the cover sheet, and she dated it, and she gave it to Fabian Ox, who was our business agent for 22 years, and has been retired for 6. Dorota printed it on the Thursday, and it took the better part of a day. 34 years of dispatch is not a document. It is a box. I did not open it. I want that on the record because it is the only part of this I got right on instinct rather than by working it out. I did not open the box, I did not check it, and I did not carry it anywhere. Fabian collected it from the hall and Fabian kept it. And if anybody ever asks me under oath whether I had access to that record before it was reviewed, the answer is no. That is the trade talking. In my work, a man does not sign for his own test. The X-ray goes to the inspector. The inspector is not you, and a weld you certified yourself is not a certified weld. Then I did the thing that I think was the only clever thing I have ever done in my life. And it was not clever, it was just the trade. I asked Fabian to request a contractor compliance review of my own file. A member can ask for one, and almost nobody ever has. It puts an outside auditor through every hour you ever booked, looking for $1 that does not belong, and men avoid it the way they avoid a tax audit. I asked for the thing that would finish me if what my son had wondered about were true. Fabian sat with that for a second, and then he said, "You know what this is going to look like if there's anything in there." I said, "There isn't anything in there." He said, "I know that. I'm asking if you know it." Now the object I keep, since I have got this far without mentioning it. There is a piece of pipe holding the shop door open at the Union Hall. 2 feet of 8-inch carbon steel with a 45 on it and 1 weld. I cut it out of a line at the Colbeck refinery in the turnaround of '96, and I kept it because the X-ray came back perfect, which does not happen often, and my stencil is on it about 4 inches from the weld. 29 years that pipe has held the shop door open. Everybody steps over it. There is nobody under 50 in that hall who knows whose it is. I carried it out to the truck the week the card went. I could not tell you why. There was no reason. It sat in the footwell for 11 weeks, and I looked at it every time I got in. The review took 5 weeks. An outside auditor sat in a room at the local with 34 years of dispatch on one side of him, and the contractor's returns on the other, and went through it a year at a time. I was not permitted to be present, and I did not want to be. Fabian rang me twice a week and said the same thing both times, which was that it was going fine, and that fine was not a word that meant anything yet. In the 4th week, they asked me for one thing, an explanation of a $900 cash deposit in 2009. I sat at the kitchen table with Bernadette, and neither of us could remember it. One line on a bank statement from 16 years back, and the whole thing hanging off it. The 900 was the truck. I sold a 1994 F-50 to a man named Emil Subjak for $900 in the March. And Bernadette remembered it at about 11 o'clock that night, because Emil had brought a fruit cake at Christmas for 4 years afterwards, and she had always thought that was odd. He is dead now. His son wrote out a statement, one line 16 years back, and it took 4 days and a dead man's son to close it. 4 days and a dead man's son to close one line. I had a clean record, and it still nearly did not hold. I did not know that Helena was doing anything. She did not tell me, and she did not tell her mother, and she certainly did not tell her brother. She is a scheduler at the refinery, which means she has access to the contractor payroll system, which means she could see every hour every contractor ever billed for me from the other side. The refinery side, not the halls. So she pulled it, all of it. And then she sat down and did an arithmetic that had never occurred to me in 9 years, which was to add up the overtime, 4,100 hours. She told me later that she did it twice because she did not believe it the first time. The meeting was on a Thursday in February, 2:30, in the contractor office at the refinery, with sleet coming at the window sideways, 9 people in a room built for 6. Colbeck gets weather off the lake in February, and that Thursday it was sleet coming sideways, the kind that does not settle, and just makes everything the color of a nickel. I got there 40 minutes early, and sat in the truck in the contractor lot, with the heater going and the pipe in the footwell where it had been for 11 weeks. The contractor office is a portable building on blocks, with a steel stair up to it, and a handrail that somebody has re-welded twice, badly, and I noticed the welds the way you notice a misspelling in a sign. Inside it is one long room with a table for 6 and 11 chairs, a whiteboard with somebody's shutdown schedule still on it from November, and a window unit that rattles. The auditor was there with his report. Fabian was there. Dorota came, which nobody asked her to do, and sat at the back with her coat on, and Merrick was there, because he had asked to be. I did not know he was coming until he walked in. He sat down across from me and said, "Hello, Dad," and I said hello, and that was the whole of it. The auditor read his findings. 34 years, every hour reconciled, no discrepancy, no unreported income, nothing. He read it flat, the way you read a thing you have read 100 times, and it took 4 minutes. Merrick had a folder in front of him that he never opened. He kept both hands flat on it, the way a man does when he has decided in advance that he is going to be calm. And about every 30 seconds he moved his thumb. I had not seen him since the Christmas before last. He has got heavier, and he has got his mother's jaw, and he was wearing a good coat. Nobody had told him his sister was coming. And then Helena stood up, and she had 2 stacks of paper with her, and I had no idea what they were. She had not told anybody she was coming with anything. She had signed in at the gate that morning, as a scheduler attending a contractor meeting, which is what she was. She put the hall's dispatch history on the table, and she put the refinery's payroll history next to it. And she asked the auditor whether he would read them against each other. He said he already had. She said, then say what the overtime comes to. And he said 4,106 hours. Nobody in that room said anything at all. The sleet was going at the window, and somebody's radio was on somewhere down the corridor. Then Helena looked at her brother and she said one sentence. She said, that is 9 Christmases, Merrick. I counted them. He did not answer her. He looked at the table. The window unit came on. Somebody's radio was going in the corridor, and you could hear the pump house through the wall. That low note it makes that you stop hearing, after about a week, and never really stop hearing. Dorota Pilch got up at the back and put her coat on and went out. And she did it quietly, and I understood exactly why. She had known that boy since he was 9 years old. Fabian Ox, who is 70 and does not say much, leaned over to the auditor and asked him whether he needed anything else from anybody, and the auditor said no, and that was the end of the meeting. The whole business took 40 minutes. 9 people, 40 minutes, a portable building on blocks in the sleet. Merrick stood up before I did. He came round the end of the table and he stopped about a yard away, and he put his hand out. I want to be honest about what I did, because I have gone over it a great many times since, and I am still not sure it was right. I shook his hand. I did not say anything. Then I picked up the pipe, went down the steel stair, got into the cab and sat with my hands on the wheel a while before I turned the key, and through the window of that portable I could see him still standing at the end of the table, with his folder under his arm and nobody talking to him. I never asked him to do it, and I have to be able to say that. He said that in October, in an interview room in Terre Haute, to a man with a file, and it went in the record, and it is what everything else came out of. Here is the thing about that sentence. It is true. I never did ask him. He was 24 and standing in a corridor outside a courtroom, and I made the decision in about 4 seconds, and I never once put it to him as a choice. What he did with it, 9 years later, was take a thing that was done for him and turn it into a thing that happened near him. Not a lie. A reclassification. The card came back after 11 weeks and 3 days. The letter says no disqualifying offense and no adverse finding, and the compliance review is stapled behind it, which means that for the rest of my working life, my file is the cleanest file in that hall. Merrick withdrew his statement in writing. He did it in March, without being asked, and I have never once believed it was because of the auditor. Because he made it to a state investigator in a licensing matter, the withdrawal goes in the file next to the statement, and neither of them comes off. A man who signed something false to the state and then corrected it, sitting there permanently. On the record, every compliance-sensitive employer he ever applies to will pull. He was out of the regional post inside a month. He was off the bonus schedule the same week. He resigned in the autumn and he is selling industrial fasteners now in Ohio, and doing fine, and I mean that. He got what he was protecting, which was nothing. Nobody prosecuted him. There was nothing to prosecute. And I have come to understand that this is worse for him than a charge would have been, because a charge ends. He has a file. The restitution is not coming back. It was lawfully paid and lawfully received, and there is no court in this country that would look at it twice. $148,000, and the house on Bellin Street. I got my card back, and I got the cleanest file in that hall, and my son finally got what he had been protecting, which was nothing at all. I have not been able to decide in a year whether that counts as justice or just as arithmetic. Zygmunt came to the duplex in April. He did not phone first. He stood on the step with his hat in his hands like a man selling something, and he said, I heard it came out right. I said it did. He said, good, and then he stood there, and I stood there, and after a while I said, you want a coffee? And he came in. We have not talked about the car park, and I do not think we are going to. He is 66, and I am 61, and there is a version of this where we spend the rest of it not talking about it, and still eat breakfast on Sundays, and I will take that. Helena got a promotion in June that had nothing to do with any of this. She has never once mentioned the 9 Christmases to me. She said it in that room, to her brother, and never again. And the shoebox with 108 stubs in it is still in her flat. I asked her in the summer why she kept them, and she said because somebody was going to have to prove it one day, and I said, you were 25. And she said, I know. In May, Fabian Ox brazed the pipe. I dropped it on the concrete at the yard, getting it out of the truck, and the elbow cracked at the heat-affected zone, which is where they always go. Brass into a steel joint. It is not what you do. It is what a 70-year-old man with a torch and no certification is allowed to do, and no inspector alive would pass it. There is a bright gold line across that gray pipe now, and it is going to be there when everybody in this story is dead. It is back at the hall, holding the shop door open, and people still step over it. And the card is back in my wallet, and the file behind it is the cleanest file in that hall, and my son finally got what he had been protecting all along, which was nothing at all. Bernadette asked me in the summer whether I was going to write to him. I said I did not know. She said, "Well, you have got the address," and went back to what she was doing, and that is the closest either of us has come to discussing it in a year. The letter is written. It is in the drawer under the phone with the electricity bills, and I have not sent it, and I could not tell you tonight whether I am going to. So here is what I would leave you with, and then I will let you go. Nobody ever has to accuse you of anything to take everything you have. They only have to wonder about you out loud to somebody who keeps a file, and the file does the rest, and you will not be told. So if your living rests on a license, understand that your record is not yours and never was. It is kept by other people. Do not hear that as a weakness. It is the only defense there is, and it only works if they have been keeping it all along. Do not tidy up your own paperwork. Make sure somebody else already has it. Now here is the one I cannot settle, and I would honestly like to know what you think. My brother told me in a car park 9 years ago that the boy needed the 30 months more than he needed the money, and that I was not saving my son. I was buying myself out of having raised a thief. I paid $148,000. I lost the house. I lost my brother for 9 years. And what I bought with all of it was a man who at 38 could sit in an interview room and say he never asked me to do it, because he never once had to be the kind of person who asks. So was Zygmunt right? If you can pay for your child not to be punished, and you can, is that love, or is it the very last thing you ought to do for him? I have been on both sides of that for 9 years, and I am no closer. Tell me in the comments what you would have done in that corridor. And subscribe to this channel while you are down there, and tell me where you are watching from.